Welcome to System Dynamics Online Tutorials. What I would like to discuss today is the ability of the system to have different costing methods and to actually set and choose the costing method that best suits your particular company. Dynamic 3i offers actually four costing methodologies. And that is most importantly set in the system flags maintenance, which is covered on another tutorial, and it's within the costing set of values within the system flags as to how the system is going to operate. If we choose the costing flag to choose, we see that there's a cost flag here telling Dynamic 3i to operate under either a standard costing methodology, an average costing methodology, or a FIFO, which is first in, first out actual costing, or actually what we have as well is a LIFO, which is last in, first out actual costing. So again, to cover this, the standard is standard costing, average is average costing, and both of these FIFO and LIFO instantly put Dynamic 3i into an actual costing based on first in, first out, or last in, first out. And just to discuss briefly what these particular flags do and the impact on the rest of the system. From a standard cost perspective, if you set the system to operate under this methodology, then the costing is based upon the use of variances and the general ledger postings according to a set standard cost for an item. Now, what is required from a standard costing perspective is that in the inventory module, and if we go into the inventory module here, we go into the maintenances, and we have, into the processing, and we have product cost maintenance. And basically what has to happen is that for every item, we must set up a cost for that item in the system. And the cost maintenance allows for entry of all of these costs with effective dates and last effective date, etc. And this is covered on another tutorial. But the basis is that everything is set in here, both purchased and raw materials, and they would have a cost associated with them. And that standard cost then gets updated via the cost update onto the stocking file and associated with the actual product. In the case of any manufactured items, these costs profiles or components are then rolled up from a structure perspective. So in manufacturing, when we have a bill of material, the actual those costs are rolled up from each individual standard costs of purchased items or raw materials that go into that manufactured item, and that's done in the cost control module under the manufacturing environment. So what happens there is, after setting up all of the costs for the standard costs for the raw materials, in the cost control module down here, we actually do a cost file roll up, and what that does is rolls up all the raw materials into the standard cost of the finished good and updates it back into our inventory module as if we actually entered it under the product cost maintenance. What happens when these profiles are updated in the inventory? The current standard cost of the product is then set. And what happens with purchase price variances is utilized in conjunction with the standard costing. And all of these variances are recorded from an AP perspective. So purchase price variances are used when items come in, purchases come in where the cost was actually more than the standard cost. We, based on the reason code and the general ledger posting for the product groupings, those variances are pushed out into a PPV. So you can track against the accounts payable the purchase price variances to the standard. That's basically how standard cost operates. So the fluctuations of costs as time progresses, your system operates on a standard cost, and actual purchasing and raw materials costs may fluctuate over time, but average out or come down into a standard cost. Everything is tracked towards that standard level. Average costing, so if we go back to the average cost on the system flag maintenance, if we tell the system to operate under an average cost methodology, the system then calculates and utilizes the average cost of the product for all cost transactions within the system. Now, average cost is a calculation of all inbound goods The cost of an inbound good is calculated into the average by utilizing the current value of the goods on hand, quantity on hand multiplied by the average cost, plus the value of inbound goods as they're coming in, and this total is divided by the total number of units to establish a new average cost. So every time a receipt is made in the system, or the on-hand is increased or decreased, the average cost is automatically calculated in the system. I might note also that even if you're any one of these costing methodologies, from an information perspective, the average cost is always calculated. So at any point in time, no matter what methodology you're using, you can see the average cost of any given component. And basically that's how average costing operates. I might also note that under that particular costing methodology, the manufacturing modules are not used. So you would not be setting Dynamic 3i to operate under average costing, as well as utilizing Dynamic 3i manufacturing. Dynamic 3i manufacturing operates under either a standard cost methodology or an actual cost FIFO LIFO methodology, not under an average costing methodology. If we set the system to operate under a FIFO, first in, first out, or LIFO, last in, first out situation, we're automatically telling the system that we want to use actual costing. And the system will then utilize this, and you can optionally still set up all the standard costs to have a reference point. This would be done to establish a reference point if you wanted to compare associated cost against, if desired. But under an actual costing environment, the costing is tracked by the actual receipted cost of the items. First in, first out is exactly what it does as far as items being received in. So as the as an example, as the month progresses, my September 1st receipts, September 5th receipts, September 7th receipts would all come into the system on a first in, first out basis. The cost of those individual receipts of the items would be tracked to the item, as well as propagating themselves into manufacturing, into the actual cost of those items being used on jobs. And the inventories would be reduced by a first in, first out, so it would actually use the September 1st one, September 5th one, September 7th one first in that order. If I set it to actual costing and LIFO, obviously the order is just reversed. I'm using my last in, so my September 7th is what I'm going to use first, and it's going to be the first one out. And I'm going to reduce my inventories backwards using the September 5th, September 7th, September 5th, September 1st. Based on the FIFO principles and LIFO principles, as materials received into the inventory at varying costs, these quantities are depleted against a job with their associated costs transferred directly to the job, as I was saying. The last cost element of an item will be updated to the last receipted cost of the item in the case of a raw material or purchased component. In the case of a finished or fabricated item, an automatic roll-up of the actual cost of all of the components will be done into the last cost of that finished or fabricated item as it's received into inventories. So actual costing literally traces everything from receipt of the raw material transfer onto the job, or just receipt of the raw material into the system, and then in manufacturing, the system automatically rolls those things up to give it an actual cost for that item when the inventories are increased. And then as they are depleted at that actual cost going out of the system. As with all of the costing methodologies, the average cost is always calculated for information purposes. So I hope that explains basically, in short, the three different costing methodologies that are applicable with Dynamic 3i. Once again, standard, setting up each of the individual components and not allowing the cost to fluctuate and tracking them against the standard or flat line type cost, and then an average costing methodology where it's based on the component levels of inventory, and it allows me to calculate and sort of ease down the fluctuations of items that have high fluctuations, or actually using a costing method, an actual costing methodology with the ability of the system to do first in, first out of the items, or a last in, first out of the item.